I'm Hannah, 32 female. I live a quiet life, one that I've meticulously curated for myself in the heart of a city that never sleeps. My small apartment, filled with the scent of old paper and freshly brewed tea, is my sanctuary. By day, I work as an archival librarian, a profession that suits my temperament perfectly. I find comfort in order, in the careful preservation of history, and in the tangible weight of a story held within a bound volume. My life is simple, predictable, and until recently, entirely devoid of drama. That all changed when I inherited my grandparents' estate, a legacy that was meant to be a blessing, but which quickly threatened to become a curse, unearthing a side of my family I had never truly understood. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. My grandparents, Eleanor and Arthur, were the bedrock of my world. They were Depression-era children who had built a comfortable life through decades of hard work, prudent saving, and a small, successful hardware store that was a fixture in their town. Their home wasn't just a house. It was a sprawling, two-story testament to their love, filled with the echoes of family dinners, holiday celebrations, and the quiet hum of a life well lived. They raised me after my parents passed away in a car accident when I was 10, and their love was the glue that held my fractured world together. They taught me the value of integrity, the importance of foresight, and the quiet strength of doing the right thing, even when no one is watching. When they passed away within 6 months of each other last year, the grief was a physical weight. Arthur went first, his heart finally giving out after 91 years. Eleanor followed soon after, a quiet fading, as if her soul simply couldn't bear to be without his. It was a beautiful, tragic end to a 65-year love story. In their wake, they left me everything. The house, their savings, their investments, a total estate valued at just over $1.9 million. I was their only grandchild who had ever mattered to them, the one who visited every weekend, who listened to their stories, who held their hands in the final, quiet moments. Their generosity was overwhelming, but it was also accompanied by a lifetime of quiet warnings. Family isn't always who you think they are, Hannah, my grandmother used to say, her fingers knitting a complex pattern without a single glance. Blood is thicker than water, but money can poison the well. She never spoke ill of her daughter, my Aunt Brenda, but there was always a careful, deliberate silence when her name came up. Brenda was a woman who lived in a state of perpetual crisis, most of her own making. She drifted from one failed venture to another, always with her hand out, always with a story of how she'd been wronged. Her son, my cousin Jasper, was cut from the same cloth, a man whose charm was as superficial as the polish on the used cars he sold. I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that they would see my inheritance not as a gift from my grandparents to me, but as a resource they were entitled to. So, before the ink on the probate documents was even fully dry, I made a call to Mr. Alastair Finch. He had been my grandparents' lawyer for 40 years, a man whose quiet demeanor belied a fiercely sharp legal mind. He was more than just their lawyer. He was their confidant, a keeper of secrets, and a pillar of integrity. When I met him in his mahogany-paneled office, the air thick with the smell of leather and justice, I laid out my fears. "I want to protect it, Mr. Finch," I said, my voice steady despite the tremor in my hands. "All of it, the house, the money, everything. I want to honor what they built, not see it squandered." He listened patiently, his steepled fingers resting on his chin, his eyes kind but serious. He wasn't surprised. He had seen Brenda's patterns for decades. He recommended a revocable living trust. It was the perfect instrument for my needs. On paper, for all public purposes, I would be the owner of the house. But the true ownership, the legal title, would be held by the trust. Any attempt to transfer the deed or sell the property would be legally impossible without the consent of the trustee, which was me, with Mr. Finch as the successor trustee. It was a shield, invisible to the outside world but legally ironclad. It meant that while I lived in the house and managed the estate, its core assets were protected from any external claims, be it from creditors or, more pertinently, from greedy relatives. The process was meticulous and swift. Mr. Finch, with the precision of a master craftsman, drew up the documents. We transferred the title of the house, the investment accounts, and the savings into the Hannah Gable Revocable Trust. It was a quiet, legal maneuver. A secret fortification. To anyone looking at public records, it would appear that Hannah Gable owned 123 Maple Lane. But the fine print, the legally binding reality, was that the trust owned it. It felt like I was honoring my grandparents' wisdom, applying their lessons of foresight to the very legacy they had left me. I felt a sense of peace settle over me for the first time since their passing. The house was safe. Their memory was safe. I moved my belongings in, carefully packing away their most treasured possessions while weaving my own life into the fabric of the home. The quiet halls, once a source of painful memory, began to feel like a warm embrace. For nearly a year, there was peace. And then, as my grandmother had always quietly predicted, the vultures began to circle. The peace was shattered on a crisp Tuesday morning last month. The autumn leaves were just beginning to turn, painting the neighborhood in brilliant strokes of gold and crimson. I was in the kitchen, enjoying a rare quiet morning with a cup of coffee and a book, when the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. Through the peephole, I saw them, Aunt Brenda and my cousin Jasper, standing on the porch with expressions of smug satisfaction. It was the kind of look that immediately set my teeth on edge. Brenda was dressed in an outfit that was clearly too expensive for her means, a designer knockoff handbag clutched in her hand like a weapon. Jasper stood beside her, rocking back and forth on his heels, a smarmy grin plastered across his face. He looked like a man who believed he had just won the lottery without buying a ticket. An alarm bell, distant but insistent, began to ring in my mind. I opened the door, schooling my features into a neutral expression. Aunt Brenda, Jasper, what a surprise. "No hug for your favorite Aunt Hannah?" Brenda said, her voice dripping with false sweetness as she pushed past me into the foyer. Jasper followed, his eyes sweeping across the entryway, cataloging the furniture, the paintings, the very air, as if he were assessing property values. "We're not staying long," Jasper announced, his grin widening. "Just here to give you the good news. Well, good for us." I closed the door slowly, a cold knot tightening in my stomach. "And what news is that?" Brenda settled herself on the antique settee in the living room, the one my grandmother had adored. She ran a hand over the velvet upholstery, a possessive gesture that made my skin crawl. "Jasper and I had a long talk," she began, "about what's fair. Your grandparents, bless their hearts, they weren't always of sound mind at the end. They were old. Confused. It's a tragedy, really." I folded my arms across my chest. They were as sharp as tacks until the very end, and you know it. "That's a matter of opinion," Jasper interjected, walking over to the fireplace and picking up a silver-framed photo of my grandparents on their wedding day. He studied it for a moment before setting it down with a dismissive clink. "The point is, Mom has been struggling, and as their only daughter, it's only right that she be taken care of, that this house, their primary asset, should go to her." The audacity of it was breathtaking. Brenda had barely visited her parents in their final years, her appearances always brief and always culminating in a thinly veiled request for money. Jasper hadn't been to the house in over a decade. "The will was perfectly clear," I said, my voice dangerously calm. "Everything was left to me. Mr. Finch oversaw the entire process." Brenda waved a dismissive hand. "Wills can be contested, but we decided to take a more direct approach. A cleaner approach." She looked at Jasper, who reached into the inner pocket of his blazer and produced a folded document. He unfolded it with a theatrical flourish and held it out to me. It was a quitclaim deed. My eyes scanned the text, the legal jargon, the property description. And then I saw it. At the bottom, a signature. My signature, or a crude approximation of it, transferring ownership of the house from Hannah Gable to Brenda Gable. Beside it was a notary's stamp and signature. "What is this?" I asked, though I already knew. "It's a deed, silly," Brenda chirped. "You signed the house over to me, don't you remember we had a lovely chat last week? You agreed it was the right thing to do for family. I stared at them, my mind racing. A forged signature. A fraudulent notary. This was not just greed, it was a brazen, criminal act. They hadn't just come to ask for money. They had come to seize my home. Jasper's grin was predatory now. It's all legal and filed with the county clerk's office. The house is officially in Mom's name, which means, unfortunately, that you're trespassing. He let that hang in the air for a moment. We're not heartless, though. We'll give you until Friday to pack your things and get out. We're generous like that. They stood there, a united front of smug entitlement, rad. Eyeing an aura of triumph. They truly believed they had won. They had seen a quiet, bookish librarian, someone they assumed was a pushover, a meek little girl who would crumble at the first sign of conflict. They had underestimated me. They had mistaken my quiet nature for weakness. And they had no idea about the invisible, ironclad shield I had built around my inheritance. A slow smile spread across my face. I couldn't help it. The sheer, idiotic arrogance of their plan was almost comical. I looked from Brenda's expectant face to Jasper's smug grin. I just smiled and said, "You really think I'd let that happen?" The confusion that flickered in their eyes was immensely satisfying. They had expected tears, protests, maybe a desperate, angry phone call. They had not expected calm amusement. "This isn't a joke, Hannah," Brenda snapped, her sweet facade cracking. "We have the paperwork. The house is mine." "Is it?" I replied, my voice light. "Well, this should be interesting. You've made a very, very big mistake." Jasper scoffed. "The only mistake was you thinking you could keep all this for yourself. The movers will be here Friday at noon. Be gone." They turned and walked out, leaving the fraudulent deed on the coffee table. I watched them go, the cold knot in my stomach replaced by a surge of icy resolve. The game was on. And they had no idea they were playing against a master archivist, a woman who knew that the truth, the real, undeniable truth, is always in the paperwork. As the front door clicked shut, plunging the house back into silence, my carefully maintained composure dissolved, replaced by a wave of pure, cold fury. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from adrenaline. I walked over to the coffee table and picked up the quitclaim deed. It felt tainted, a violation of the sanctity of my home. My gaze fell upon the signature, the clumsy, uneven forgery of my name. It was a passable attempt if you didn't know what to look for, but to my trained eye, it was a laughable fake. As an archivist, I work with historical documents every day. I've handled everything from 18th century letters to modern legal contracts. My entire profession is built on an understanding of authenticity, of the subtle tells of ink, paper, and penmanship. The pressure of the pen was wrong, too heavy on the downstrokes. The loop of the H was too wide, the tail of the H in my last name too short. It was the signature of someone who had seen my name written down, but had never felt the rhythm of it. But the signature was only one piece of the puzzle. The more critical element was the notarization. A legal document like a deed requires a notary public to witness the signature, verifying the identity of the signer and confirming they are acting of their own free will. The stamp on this document was from a notary named Janet Peterson. The name meant nothing to me. The stamp itself looked legitimate, but the signature beside it was just as suspicious as my own forgery. It was a hasty, almost illegible scrawl. My first call was not to the police, but to Mr. Finch. I explained the situation calmly and concisely, reading the details from the fraudulent deed over the phone, the date of the alleged signing, the property description, and the name of the notary. There was a long silence on the other end of the line before he spoke, his voice a low growl of controlled anger. "They wouldn't dare," he murmured, more to himself than to me. "Hannah, do not worry. They have stepped into a trap of their own making. That deed is worthless." "I know it's forged, Mr. Finch," I said, "but they've filed it with the county. How do we fight that?" "We don't need to fight it directly, not yet," he explained, his voice taking on the reassuring tone of a seasoned general outlining a battle plan. "The trust is our fortress. The title of the property was transferred out of your individual name and into the trust nearly a year ago. You, Hannah Gable, legally did not have the authority to sign that house over to anyone. Only the trustee, you in your official capacity, could do that, and it would require a completely different set of documents. This quitclaim deed is a legal fiction. It's a piece of paper with no power. Relief washed over me, so potent it almost made me dizzy. The trust. Of course. My quiet, precautionary measure was now an impenetrable wall. They had forged the signature of a person who no longer had the legal right to give the house away. But we can't just leave it at that, can we? I pressed. They committed fraud. They can't get away with this. No, my dear, they cannot, Mr. Finch agreed, and we will make sure of it. This is where we go on the offensive. First, the notary. A compromised or fraudulent notary is the linchpin of their entire scheme. I want you to look up this Janet Peterson. Find out if she's a real notary, where she operates, everything you can. I will start preparing the legal paperwork to have the fraudulent deed expunged from the county records, and will draft a cease and desist letter that could stop a charging rhinoceros in its tracks. You, my dear, are good at digging. So dig. Hanging up the phone, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. This was my world now: research, investigation, following a paper trail. I turned to my laptop and began my search for Janet Peterson, Notary Public. The State Secretary of State website has a public database of all commissioned notaries. I typed in the name. My heart beat a little faster. There she was, Janet Peterson. Her commission was active. Her listed business address was a mail and ship store in a strip mall about 45 minutes away, in a town I rarely ever visited. This was a crucial piece of information. They had used a real notary. This meant one of two things. Either they had found a corrupt notary willing to break the law for a price, or they had somehow deceived her. The latter seemed unlikely, given that notarizing a deed requires the signer to be physically present with valid identification. That left the far more probable, and far more sinister, option: Janet Peterson was in on it. My mind started connecting dots. The mail and ship store address was telling. It was an impersonal, transient location, not a professional office. It was the kind of place you de-use if you didn't want a permanent, easily traceable base of operations. The next step was to find out more about this location. I used a satellite map to view the strip mall. It was a tired-looking place with a discount shoe store, a laundromat, and a check-cashing business. Not exactly a hub for legitimate legal transactions. I then ran a wider search, cross-referencing Janet Peterson's name with public records databases, social media, and online forums. For a while, I found nothing. And then, a hit. It was on a local consumer watchdog forum. A post from 8 months ago, buried deep in a thread about real estate scams. The user described how their elderly father had been tricked into signing over his house. The details were eerily familiar: a quitclaim deed, a suspicious signature, and a notary who had seemingly appeared out of nowhere. The notary's name mentioned in the post: Janet Peterson. My blood ran cold. This wasn't a one-time thing. This was a pattern. My aunt and cousin hadn't just come up with a desperate, amateurish plan. They had sought out a professional, a facilitator of fraud. This was an organized conspiracy. Brenda and Jasper weren't just greedy, they were criminals, and they had enlisted another criminal to help them. I screenshotted the forum post, saved the link, and documented everything. Every search, every result, every piece of data. I was building a case, laying out the evidence brick by brick, just as I would organize a historical collection. The forged signature on the deed was the entry point, but the corruption of the notary was the key to unraveling their entire scheme and ensuring they would face the full consequences of their actions. Armed with the knowledge that Janet Peterson was likely a serial fraudster, my investigation deepened. The next logical step was to connect her directly to my cousin. If I could prove they knew each other, it would transform their defense from a far-fetched story of me willingly signing a document to a clear-cut case of conspiracy. Jasper was the weak link. He was arrogant, flashy, and lived his life largely online. If there was a connection, he would have been careless enough to leave a trace. I started with the obvious: social media. I created a discreet, anonymous profile and began to scour his friends lists, his tagged photos, his check-ins. Jasper's online presence was exactly what you'd expect from a mediocre car salesman with an overinflated ego. Photos of himself leaning against cars he didn't own, boastful posts about sales commissions, and a network of friends who all seemed to share his slick, superficial persona. I scrolled back through months, then years, of his digital life. It was a tedious process, a digital needle in a haystack. After hours of searching, I found it. It wasn't a direct link, but it was something. A group photo from a local bar, posted about a year and a half ago. Jasper was in the center, arms slung around another man. In the background, partially obscured but definitely recognizable from her notary commission photo, was Janet Peterson. She wasn't with their group, but she was there, in the same place at tea. Same time. It was circumstantial, but it was a start. I saved the photo. The real breakthrough, however, came from a more professional source. As an archivist, I have access to a number of powerful research databases, including ones that aggregate public records, property transactions, business licenses, court filings, and more. It's a tool I normally use to verify the provenance of historical documents, but it was perfect for this. I ran a search on Janet Peterson, not just her name, but her notary commission number. I was looking for patterns, for any other deeds she had notarized that seemed suspicious. The system returned dozens of results. Most appeared to be legitimate transactions. But as I cross-referenced the names on the deeds with other public records, a disturbing pattern began to emerge. In at least 5 other cases over the past 2 years, Janet Peterson had notarized a quitclaim deed transferring property from an elderly individual to a younger relative or a third party. And in 3 of those 5 cases, the original owner was now deceased, and the property had been quickly sold off. The other 2 cases had resulted in lawsuits filed by other family members, alleging fraud and undue influence. One of those lawsuits was the one I had seen mentioned on the Consumer Watchdog Forum. This was bigger than I had imagined. This wasn't just a notary for hire, this was a predatory operation targeting the vulnerable. Now I had to find the money trail. How were they connected? I shifted my focus to Jasper. I ran a search on his name and any registered businesses. Nothing. Then I searched for Brenda. Again, nothing. They were careful enough not to use their own names. But criminals, especially greedy, amateurish ones, often make mistakes. They get impatient. I decided to take a gamble. I thought about the kind of person Jasper was. He loved easy money and shortcuts. It was unlikely he paid Janet Peterson in cash. A wire transfer would be too traceable. A check, perhaps, or a payment app, that felt more his style. It was a long shot, but I searched for social media accounts connected to Janet Peterson's known email address from her notary registration. I found a profile on a popular payment app under her name. Her transaction history wasn't public, of course, but the app, in a feature designed for social interaction, showed a list of her public friends on the platform. My heart hammered against my ribs as I scanned the list, and there it was, not Jasper Gable, not Brenda Gable, but Jasper's Auto Deals. It was a username, a doing business as moniker that was just arrogant enough for him to think it was clever. Clicking on it revealed a profile picture of Jasper leaning against a convertible, the same picture from his other social media accounts. He had sent Janet Peterson a payment of $5,002 weeks ago. The transaction note was a single, damning word: consulting. I took a high-resolution screenshot. This was the smoking gun. This was the irrefutable link between the conspiracy and the conspirator. The payment, made just days before they appeared on my doorstep, was for her services in fabricating the deed. They hadn't just forged my name, they had paid a professional to help them steal my home, a professional who made a living from enabling predators like them. The final piece of the puzzle fell into place when I cross-referenced the address of the mail-and-ship store where Janet Peterson was based. Who owned the strip mall? A large, faceless property management company. But who leased that specific storefront? I ran the address through a business directory database. The store was leased by a shell corporation, JP Enterprises. the registered agent for that corporation, Janet Peterson, but who were the other corporate officers? I paid the small fee for the full incorporation documents. The treasurer of JP Enterprises, listed right there in black and white, was a man named Martin G. Weller. And who was Martin G. Weller? A quick search of public records and news articles revealed that he was a disgraced real estate attorney who had been disbarred 5 years ago for, I could hardly believe it, orchestrating a scheme involving fraudulent deeds and targeting elderly homeowners. It all clicked. Janet Peterson wasn't the mastermind. She was the front, the notary, the public face of the operation. The disbarred lawyer, Martin Weller, was the brains, running his old scams from the shadows through a shell corporation and a corrupt notary. And my family, my greedy, foolish, and now deeply criminal family, had walked right into their web, becoming their latest clients. I gathered all my findings: the social media photo, the list of suspicious deeds, the payment app transaction, the corporate filings for the shell company. I organized them into a clear, chronological file, complete with annotations and supporting documents. It was a perfect archive of their greed and criminality. I sent the entire package to Mr. Finch in a secured, encrypted email. His reply came within minutes. "They've done more than dig their own grave, Hannah. They've built themselves a prison. It's time to let them walk into it." With the evidence compiled, and in Mr. Finch's capable hands, the strategy shifted from investigation to execution. The goal was no longer just to protect my house. It was to ensure that Brenda and Jasper faced the full legal consequences of their actions. Mr. Finch was a lion in winter, roused to a righteous fury by the blatant fraud perpetrated against his late client's legacy. "We will not just invalidate the deed, Hannah," he had said over the phone, his voice vibrating with purpose. "We will let them proceed with their little eviction plan. We will let them show up with their movers. We will let them walk, with all the arrogance in the world, directly into a trap they cannot escape. We need to establish their intent beyond any shadow of a doubt. Their actions on Friday will be the final nail in their coffin." The plan was elegant in its simplicity. First, Mr. Finch drafted a formal complaint to the state's notary commission, detailing the fraudulent notarization and providing the evidence of Janet Peterson's pattern of predatory behavior. This would trigger an official investigation that would likely result in her commission being revoked and could lead to criminal charges. Next, he prepared a comprehensive package for the local district attorney's office. This wasn't just a civil matter anymore. It was a criminal conspiracy involving forgery, wire fraud, and elder fraud, given the pattern of targeting vulnerable seniors. The evidence I had uncovered, especially the payment from Jasper to Janet and her connection to the disbarred lawyer, was overwhelmingly strong. He would hold off on filing it until after their stunt on Friday, to allow them to fully commit to their crime. Finally, he drafted the documents for our confrontation. The first was a notice of lease pendens, a legal document filed with the county clerk that publicly declares that the property is the subject of a legal dispute. This would effectively cloud the title, making it impossible for Brenda to sell, refinance, or otherwise dispose of the house until our legal action was resolved. The second was a formal quiet title action, a lawsuit designed to clear up any confusion about property ownership, which would ask the court to officially nullify the fraudulent quitclaim deed and declare the trust as the sole, legitimate owner. The third and final document was the most satisfying: a temporary restraining order, which we would ask a judge to sign, prohibiting Brenda and Jasper from setting foot on my property or contacting me in any way. My role was simple but required a steady nerve. I was to do nothing. I was not to contact them, not to answer their calls, not to give any indication that I knew what they had done or what was coming. I was to let them believe I was a frightened, confused victim, scurrying to pack my belongings before the Friday deadline. The next 2 days were a strange mixture of anxiety and calm determination. I went about my routine. I went to work, I ate my meals, I read my books. But beneath the surface, there was a current of anticipation. Every time the phone rang, I had to resist the urge to answer. Jasper, true to form, sent a gloating text message. Hope the packing is going well. Don't forget to clean the fridge. Winking face, I read it, took a deep breath, and deleted it without replying. On Thursday evening, Mr. Finch called. Everything is in place, Hannah. The petitions are ready to be filed the moment they show up tomorrow. A process server will be on standby a few blocks away. The local police department has been given a courtesy heads-up about a potential illegal eviction attempt at your address, so they will be able to respond quickly if needed. All you have to do is stand your ground. You are the rightful occupant, and you have every right to be there. Do you feel up to it? I do, I said, and the words felt truer than anything I had ever said. I wasn't the same quiet, conflict-averse woman I was a week ago. I had been threatened, and in defending my grandparents' legacy, I had discovered a strength I never knew I possessed. On Friday morning, I woke up early. I dressed not in my usual comfortable librarian attire, but in a sharp, professional blazer and slacks. I made myself a cup of tea, my hands perfectly steady. I went into my home office and took out the file folder where I had placed the original, legitimate deed that transferred the house into the trust. I also printed out a copy of the trust's declaration page, which clearly stated its existence and named me as trustee. I sat in the living room, the room where Brenda had sat so smugly just days before, and waited. The minutes ticked by with agonizing slowness. 11:45, 11:50. At 11:58 I saw it. A large, yellow moving truck rumbled down the street and parked directly in front of my house. A moment later, Jasper's obnoxious sports car pulled up behind it. He and Brenda got out, their faces wreathed in triumphant smiles. Two large men in overalls got out of the moving truck and walked towards them. Jasper pointed a dramatic finger at the front door. Brenda nodded, a look of greedy satisfaction on her face. They thought this was their moment of victory. They thought they were about to watch me, defeated and humiliated, being forced out of my home. I stood up, smoothed down my blazer, and picked up my folder of papers. I walked calmly to the front door, unlocked it, and stepped out onto the porch, closing the door firmly behind me. I stood there, waiting for them, the legal trap now fully set and baited. The show was about to begin. The four of them, Brenda, Jasper, and the two movers, stopped dead in their tracks at the foot of the porch steps. The sight of me standing there, calm and composed, holding a folder, was clearly not what they had been expecting. Jasper's triumphant grin faltered, replaced by a flicker of confusion and then irritation. Brenda's smug expression hardened into a scowl. "What are you still doing here, Hannah?" Jasper demanded, his voice loud enough for the whole neighborhood to hear. "We told you, you're out by today." One of the movers, a large man with a bewildered expression, looked from me to Jasper. "Is there a problem here?" he asked, his tone wary. "No problem at all," Jasper said, waving a dismissive hand at the mover. "She's just a little slow to accept reality. This is our house now. We're moving in." He took a step forward, his eyes locking onto mine. "Get off the porch." I didn't move. I simply held up my hand, a clear gesture for him to stop. "Actually, Jasper, you're the one who is mistaken," I said, my voice clear and steady, carrying easily in the quiet morning air. "And you are all trespassing." Brenda let out a short, ugly laugh. "Trespassing? We have the deed, you foolish girl, we told you. The house is in my name." "You have a piece of paper with a forged signature on it," I countered, my voice as sharp as glass. "A document that is legally worthless. You seem to be under the impression that I own this house. I don't." That threw them. Jasper and Brenda exchanged a confused glance. "What are you talking about?" Brenda snapped. I opened the folder. "This house," I said, holding up the first document, "is the property of the Hannah Gable Revocable Trust and has been for the past 11 months. I am the trustee, but I, as an individual, do not hold the title. Therefore, I had no legal authority to sign any quitclaim deed, even if the signature weren't a complete and obvious forgery." I let that sink in. The movers were now looking distinctly uncomfortable, shuffling their feet and avoiding eye contact. They were hired to move furniture, not to be accomplices in a crime. Jasper took another step forward, his face turning a blotchy red. You're lying, you're making things up. Am I? I said, pulling out the second document. This is a copy of the trust's declaration. And this, I added, pulling out my own driver's license, is my identification, which I'm sure is more than the fraudulent notary you hired bothered to ask for. I looked directly at the movers. I am the legal resident of this property. These people have no right to be here, and they have no authority to ask you to enter this house or remove any of its contents. If you do, you will also be trespassing and potentially liable for damages. The lead mover held up his hands. Whoa, look, lady, we don't want any trouble. We were just hired for a job. He turned to Jasper. You told us the paperwork was all squared away. It is, Jasper insisted, his voice cracking with a mixture of rage and panic. He knew he was losing control of the situation. She's bluffing. Just get her out of the way and start loading the truck. But the movers weren't moving. They were professionals, and they knew a legal mess when they saw one. At that precise moment, as if on cue, a nondescript sedan pulled up to the curb. A man in a suit got out, holding a large manila envelope. This was the process server Mr. Finch had arranged. He walked briskly up the driveway. Brenda Gable, Jasper Gable? He asked, his voice businesslike. Brenda and Jasper stared at him, dumbfounded. You've been served, the man said, handing a thick packet of documents to Brenda and another to a stunned Jasper. He then turned, got back in his car, and drove away. They looked down at the papers in their hands. I knew what they were seeing. The notice of the lawsuit, the quiet title action, the motion for the restraining order. The official, undeniable PR. Oof, that their pathetic scheme had just exploded in their faces. Brenda's face went white. Jasper ripped open the envelope and his eyes scanned the first page, his expression shifting from anger to disbelief and finally to raw, primal fear. What is this? Lawsuit? Forgery? Conspiracy? It's called consequences, Jasper, I said, my voice dropping to a low, cold tone. Did you really think you could forge my name, file a fraudulent deed, and steal my home without anyone noticing? Did you think I wouldn't fight back? As if the scene needed any more drama, a squad car quietly pulled up and parked across the street. 2 officers got out, not with any urgency, but with the calm demeanor of people who were simply there to observe and maintain the peace. Their presence was the final, crushing weight on Brenda and Jasper's charade. Brenda's bravado completely evaporated. She looked at the legal papers, at the movers who were now backing away towards their truck, at the police officers across the street, and then at me, standing on the porch, a fortress of legality. You did this, she stammered, the papers trembling in her hand. No, Aunt Brenda, I corrected her. You did this to yourselves. The lead mover cleared his throat. Yeah, we're out of here, he said to Jasper, his voice firm. You can sort this out with our office. He and his partner got back in their truck without a backward glance, started the engine, and drove away, leaving my aunt and cousin standing alone on the sidewalk, holding the proof of their own destruction. Jasper looked like he was going to be sick. He stared at me, his eyes wide with the dawning horror of what he had done. He hadn't just failed to get the house, he had walked into a legal buzzsaw. They were facing a lawsuit, criminal charges, and complete and utter ruin. They froze, just as I had pictured they would, standing on the sidewalk, their grand victory turned to ash in their mouths. The aftermath was not a loud explosion, but a slow, methodical demolition. Faced with the mountain of evidence against them, the forged deed, the payment to the notary, the conspiracy with a disbarred lawyer, and the irrefutable fact of the trust, Brenda and Jasper's legal position crumbled to dust. They had no defense. They had been caught red-handed, not just in a lie, but in a complex criminal enterprise. Mr. Finch was relentless. He filed the quiet title lawsuit, and within weeks, a judge issued a summary judgment, officially voiding the fraudulent deed and declaring the trust the sole and rightful owner of the property. The temporary restraining order was made permanent. Legally, it was as if their pathetic attempt had never happened, but the real consequences were just beginning. The district attorney's office, presented with the tidy and damning package of evidence Mr. Finch had prepared, moved swiftly. They saw it for what it was, a clear-cut case of fraud and conspiracy. Warrants were issued. The story of their arrest was a small, salacious item in the local news, detailing how a son and mother had attempted to steal their own relative's inheritance through a forged document. Their mugshots, Brenda looking haggard and terrified, Jasper looking like a deer in the headlights, were a far cry from the smug, triumphant pair who had stood on my porch. The investigation into Janet Peterson and the disbarred lawyer, Martin Weller, widened into a much larger case. My evidence was the key that unlocked a years-long pattern of predatory fraud targeting the elderly and vulnerable. Several other families came forward, their own stories tragically similar to what could have been mine. It turned into a full-blown racket, and the DA was determined to make an example of them. Faced with overwhelming evidence and the prospect of a long prison sentence, Jasper cracked. In exchange for a more lenient sentence, he confessed to everything, implicating his mother and detailing the entire scheme they had cooked up with Janet Peterson. He admitted to finding her through a guy he knew, paying her the $5,000 and forging my signature himself while she applied her notary stamp. In the end, Jasper was sentenced to 2 years in state prison, followed by 3 years of probation. His prior record wasn't clean, which didn't help him. Brenda, due to her age and lack of a prior record, avoided prison time but was sentenced to 5 years of stringent probation, a hefty fine, and mandatory community service. Both were ordered to pay restitution to me for my legal fees, a debt that will likely follow them for the rest of their lives. Janet Peterson and Martin Weller faced much more severe consequences as the masterminds of a multi-year criminal enterprise. They were both sentenced to significant prison time, their predatory careers brought to an ignominious end. I never spoke to Brenda or Jasper again. There were no tearful apologies, no pleas for forgiveness. Their greed had been so absolute that it had consumed any familial bond that might have once existed. They had shown their true colors, and I had no interest in ever seeing them again. With the legal battles over, a profound sense of peace settled over the house. It was truly mine now, not just by law but by right. I had defended it. I had honored the memory of the people who had built it. Walking through the quiet halls, I no longer felt just their presence, I felt their pride. My grandmother's warnings about family and money had been proven true, but so had their lessons about integrity, foresight, and quiet strength. The $1.9 million estate, now securely protected within the trust, was more than money. It was a legacy of a life built on hard work and love. I didn't change my life drastically. I continued my work at the library, finding solace in the quiet order of the archives, but I used the resources to honor my grandparents in meaningful ways. I established a scholarship fund at the local community college in their names, for students pursuing trades, a nod to my grandfather's humble beginnings with his hardware store. I made a significant donation to the Historical Society, ensuring that the stories of our town, the stories my grandparents were a part of, would be preserved for generations to come. The house on Maple Lane is no longer just a structure of wood and nails. It's a symbol of my own resilience. It's a testament to the fact that being quiet does not mean being weak, and that the greatest victories are often won not with loud shouts, but with meticulous preparation and an unshakable resolve. My grandparents left me their home and their savings, but the true inheritance was the wisdom they instilled in me. The wisdom to protect what you love, to stand up for what is right, and to know that the truth, when properly archived, is the most powerful weapon of all.